how you can put it into practice, the theories that we talk about. So that's kind of the plan today. So on this main slide, you'll see that there's both Annie Burbage-Ream and my name. Annie is my colleague at the museum, and she and I go around together usually. She just couldn't make it today, and so it's just me. But I'm Virginia on this slide. So the other thing I like to mention is please talk up. I like conversation. This is not a lecture, because lecturing, as you'll see in my PowerPoint, is like not the best way to get information across. So please ask questions. This will be a dialogue. Don't worry about interrupting me. That's kind of how I like to do things. All right, are we ready to go? Everybody bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? Even with daylight savings? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Thank you very much for helping. Okay. So basically what we're going to learn today is about museum education, so educating in a museum. So what does museum education mean to you?
Visually seeing things from the past is what I like.
Okay, so objects, like object-based, right? Whether the object's a photograph or an actual object, we're going to learn a lot about that. Yeah, museums are unique that they are object-based, which is very different than a school or a lecture. So museum education can help you find your way and see the themes, see where things are and how they relate to each other, and help you as you navigate the museum that is kind of better, or in addition to just you being on your own, right? And as you probably know, when school kids come, it is not quiet.
Yes.
So coming on a weekend, probably you can get that solitude. But having a place that is like a community center that is some days solitude, but some days just full of chaotic learning, having both is just amazing.
Yeah.
And education thrives in that. You kind of answered some of this. Why have education programs in museums? This is kind of a no-brainer, but I want to hear what you have to say about it. The education programs makes it come alive. Comes alive with workshops, with tours, with hands-on education. And we're going to learn all about this. Even lectures can really make something come alive rather than just seeing a boring object with a label. Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm a museum educator. Of course, I think education brings it alive. Docent-led tours are an education program. And it's probably one of the most significant programs because it's a human interaction, one to sometimes one to a group, but it's humans helping you have a conversation in the museum that brings it alive. So I wrote just a few things of why I think it's important to have docent-led tours in a museum. The first one is that it's mission imperative. The mission of a museum, if you don't know the mission of this museum, you should ask, because the mission is all important. And most missions should have both preservation of artifacts, but education. Without education, you're not a museum. If you just have preservation of artifacts, you're an archive. You have to have education to be a museum. So it's really mission imperative that we do this kind of work.
What's the word docent mean?
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I actually have a slide, but it's way down.
Oh.
I should have done it first. Does anybody know what the word docent means? What does it mean?
Can I cheat with a dictionary?
Oh, yes, you can. Everybody has a Google.
Who acts as a guide typically on a voluntary basis in a museum, art gallery, or zoo.
So you're a museum teacher. And docent comes from the Greek root docere, which means to teach.
Oh.
So basically, docent means teacher. So you are all teachers.
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, you're it. Okay, another reason is it cultivates lifelong visitors. As you said before, visiting a museum where if you're not the type that loves to read labels, sometimes you're not going to come back to that museum. But a docent-led tour will make you want to come back because it's so interesting and engaging, and it'll be different every time. So the people will come back, they will come back again and again, they will think of it as their own, they will own the museum, then they will strive to make the museum part of the community, and you have a lifelong visitor and a lifelong supporter. Like I said, empowers a sense of ownership, that's what I just talked about. Engages different audiences. So this is where that comes in that not everybody likes to just sit and read labels. Some people do, and that's great. But some people really need to have more interaction and something that brings them back. And so that's where you get people with lots of different backgrounds, lots of different ages coming to the museum because you have docent-led tours. Informal learning, relaxed, easier. We've learned the term non-linear, and we'll talk more about that. That plays right into what you said. What is formal learning then?
Classroom.
That's right. That's basically what it is. It's the classroom. Formal learning is very where you're kind of forced to be there and you're all together and you're learning in a classroom. This is going to be formal learning a little bit because you're all sitting here listening to me talk. But we do have dialogue, which is informal, and we're going to go on a sample tour, which is informal. So this is a mixture of formal and informal right now. Okay. Applies best practices in educational philosophy of teaching and learning. This right here, we're going to learn a little bit about this today, just as an underpinning for you to know why we are teaching the way we're teaching in a museum, why informal learning is so important. So I'm going to give you a crash course in philosophy of teaching and learning. It took me 6 years to get a degree, Master's of Philosophy and Education. I'm going to give it to you in like 7 minutes. So you all will know what I know by the end of it. So these are some reasons why we have docent-led tours in museums. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. Before we get started, I wanted to show you that a lot of what you're doing today and what I do in teaching is based on some standards for the American Association of State and Local History. Has anybody heard of that organization? Oh, you've heard of it? Great. You were a history teacher, so you know all about it. You're going to be the one that knows all about the educational theory, too, that I talk about. So the American Association of State and Local History is a nationwide organization that helps history entities kind of be better and learn better. And it's for employees and volunteers of those institutions. And it kind of sets the stage for how to be do state and local history, either in a museum or a historical society or as a history teacher. And they have standards. And their standards, really, there's a lot of different standards for a lot of different areas, but they have standards for education, and these are standards for education. So the standards that play into what we're doing is the institution asserts its public service role and places education at the center of that role. That means that what you're doing is important, and if you don't do it, then they're not going to be, they're not up to standard. Any history organization is not up to standard. The institution understands the characteristics and needs of its existing and potential audiences and uses this to understanding to inform its interpretation. That's something that's really important, that an organization needs to know who their audience is and who their audience isn't, like who they're not attracting and why they're not attracting it, to try and make sure that you are bringing them all in and understanding them in order to give them great education. So for example, if all you did was lectures, and I'm going to keep harping on lectures because most places do lectures and lectures are great. I don't learn by lectures, and so I like other things. If all you do is lectures, you're going to draw only the people that like lectures to your museum to learn about what you have to say. If you also then do maybe a workshop or a family program and then you have a docent-led tour, you're going to get a whole bunch of other people. And knowing who your audience is and what they like and what they will come to helps you in knowing how to teach them and bring them in. It also helps to know the cultural makeup of your community, the age, somebody said age of your community, the background, so that you are being respectful and inviting, and that you make sure that you are a community museum and that you're not shutting somebody out. You don't want to be exclusive. You want to welcome the whole community into your museum. And this standard really kind of emphasizes that. Okay, and the third standard is an institution clearly states its overall educational goals, philosophy, and messages, and demonstrates that its activities are in alignment with them. So that really is that you say how you want to give your education, and then you do it. And so this institution has really I mean, obviously you're all here because it says we want docent-led tours, and it has drawn a whole bunch of volunteers to help fulfill that. So you state what you want to do, and then you actually do it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, but in those standards, there's also some things that you should not do. The other slide was things we should do. These are things we should not do. So we gotta make sure that we're not doing biased comments or behavior related to race, ethnic background, gender, age, ability, economic status, or their personal criteria. Just make sure that you're being inclusive and understanding of your audience. You don't wanna say anything either about your current audience or even past in history that is biased. You want to be able to be welcoming to everybody. You don't want to disregard visitors' interests, abilities, knowledge, and preferences by failing to ask their interests and experiences. This goes with evaluation for the museum, but it also goes for docent-led tours, where if somebody comes in, you want to ask them if, we're going to do a 30-minute tour. Is that going to be okay for you? Can you stand for 30 minutes? And if they can't, then maybe you shorten your tour or you get a chair. You ask if they want a tour of only Crossroads, or if they're interested in other things, and if you know about other things, or you can send them to other things. Asking them what they want to make sure that your audience is being accommodated. And of course, this goes without saying, if you're all interested in history, don't use outdated, inappropriate, or inaccurate materials. History is always, there's always new research, there always is new findings, and you want to make sure you have the most up to date. And obviously don't give false information. That's kind of a no-brainer, but yeah, don't say anything that hasn't been, corroborated and been by the most appropriate and recent research in history. With the Smithsonian, you can be fairly certain that they have done their due diligence because it's the Smithsonian. So you're pretty, you have the backup of the Smithsonian for this, so you're not going to be giving false information here. This is a traveling exhibit that is from the Smithsonian, and it comes to Utah. It comes to a lot of different states, but we have it right now in Utah, and it's distributed by the Utah Humanities. And they take it to museums around the state. And it has to be small town museums. That's the whole point of this exhibit. They don't want them to go to museums that always get these kinds of things. And so there are 8, thank you, 8 different places around the state that are getting this. This exhibit though, and we'll talk about this in a minute, this exhibit really is something that they hope that the local community will come see, because it's all about change in rural America. But it's not just about change, it's about really empowering and exciting communities to be the instigators of change the way they want it. So it's trying to say, don't let other people tell you how to change and what you should change. It's that your community needs to be the one that leads it and to be proactive about it. So that's what this is all about. But it is great because it does show kind of a snapshot of rural America, how it is now, and what it was like in the past a little bit too, but it's really meant to empower the community to think about their community and how they can be their own instigators of change. Okay, so now here's the educational philosophy that I told you will consolidate 6 years into just a short time. So bear with me, but hopefully you'll get a good idea of some educational philosophy and how it underpins everything that I'm going to tell you about later. Has anybody here been a teacher? We have 1, 2. Are you familiar with some of these theories? A little bit? Okay, so we're gonna, there are, what did you say?
I might have been.
At one point. There are hundreds of theories of teaching and learning out there. We're gonna talk about just 4. So these are 4 that are really relevant to how we teach in a museum and make sense for how we teach in a museum. So the 4 we're gonna talk about is constructivism, multiple intelligences, scaffolding, and visual thinking strategies. So these are 4 different ways of thinking about teaching in a museum that can help us figure out the best way that people can learn while they're on a tour. Okay, so let's go to the first slide. This is constructivism. Go ahead and change slides. Okay, so constructivism, this is a theory that is a big umbrella theory. There are hundreds of theories underneath constructivism. But in its essence, it's that people learn by doing. And what this means, this is in direct opposition to the way that education was in the early part of the 20th century. In the early part of the 20th century, a lot of schools and a lot of teachers and educators believed in what's called behaviorism. And behaviorism believed that if you tell somebody some knowledge, they will absorb that knowledge exactly as that person told them, and they'll have it, and they'll know it, and they'll be great. So, and if you tell a whole bunch of people, they'll absorb that knowledge all in the same way, and they'll all know everything you said perfectly. It's this idea that kind of that you have knowledge, and you can open up somebody's head, pour it in, and then they have that knowledge. And this was really prevalent all the way through up to the 1960s. And that's when in schools you get a lot of rote learning, a lot of repetition, classrooms, 2 times 2 is 4. Have you ever did that? And pound on the desk. I actually did that. Even though I was raised in the 70s, it was still prevalent then. This kind of behaviorism was pretty overwhelming. Everybody did this theory or thought this theory up until, like I said, the 60s or 70s. And that's when educators started thinking, wait a minute, people aren't learning like that. And it's pretty obvious that people aren't learning like that. I mean, if you think of that whole old story of a car accident and you have 5 witnesses and all 5 witnesses have a different story of how it happened, right? It's because every person who is getting the knowledge is an individual person with individual knowledge, background knowledge. Everything kind of changes what they learn when somebody talks to them. What you ate for breakfast, how much sleep you got, if you're distracted thinking about something else, all of that changes how you get the information. So it doesn't just get poured into your head. You hear something and it gets all scrambled with what's already there, what you're thinking about, how you feel, all of that changes. So it really is this kind of learning that is chaotic and different from what anybody thinks. And because of that, constructivism really said, wait a minute, people learn totally differently. They learn something else. But what really helps and what cements it is by doing. Actually telling people something, but then they actually do it. And if they do it, if they think about it, if they are actually able to create something or teach something, then they start learning better. And this, if you all know, if you learn math, it's one thing, but if you teach math, if you've ever taught somebody math, it's like, oh yeah, that's really cemented in my head. So this idea that not everybody learns the same and that you learn better by doing is kind of the essence of constructivism. So that's something that really kind of works and we think about doing teaching in a museum. So how can this idea manifest itself in a museum? Right, giving them an experience rather than just telling them things, right? It's like immersing yourself in, and so that you're actually becoming, you know what it feels like to walk into a mine, you know how clammy and constricting it is, and you know what it smells like, somebody said about the smells, that you know that you get this feeling, and it's just a small thing. I mean, it's not like you really know what a miner does, because you're not going to be toiling away for 12 hours. But you kind of get it and you can empathize. And all of that changes how you learn. If somebody had just told you, it wouldn't be like you experiencing it going into the mine. And like I said, you're not going to get this because constructivism says that all of you have a different idea of what constructivism is. But I'm going to be giving an example during my tour, and you'll see how all these ideas play out. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oh, look at this. I forgot that I did this. So here is an image from our exhibit. How would you use constructivism to talk about this work of art? You could actually immerse them in that feeling or the sensations of the nature versus the industrial. maybe. And that could be the whole storytelling thing you were talking about, that, imagine walking up a mountain and this crisp air and the snow, and what do you feel? What do you smell? What do you think? So they're bringing it forward and they're thinking about it. And then imagine walking into an industrial plant.
Take them into the open hearth and let them feel the heat.
Yeah, and then you can feel the industrial plant. So, the storytelling can kind of help them immerse them into it. And then you can talk about the change between farm and industry. Getting them to try and empathize and experience it with you, especially if you've experienced. It doesn't all have, there's two sides to every story. It's not that, nature good, industry bad. You could talk about that, how there is a trade-off, that nature is wonderful and we need it. But you could also talk about, imagine being in the war, and imagine being afraid that all your steel industry is going to be bombed on the coast. Where are you going to put it if it's not on the coast? Well, you need to put it in the interior of the United States. So this was part fear and part self-preservation and part helping the American economy. So there was some necessity to this, having it in the middle of the country, far away from ports, which can be hard. So there's two sides to every story. There's a trade-off. The trade-off was, pristine nature, but then there's also a different side of the story. And then this really plays into this theory of change and being your own instigator of change. That did the community have a say in this? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I wasn't there at the time. Some people who might have been could talk about whether they did or not.
They wanted jobs, so they probably wanted it.
Could be, but there was probably some people who didn't want it, but the people who wanted it went out. Having things that people can touch so they can get that experience really does help with the constructive learning. You're not lecturing to them, you're facilitating the learning of them coming to these ideas and giving your own experience too, but then hearing from them and letting them come to some conclusions. All right, let's go to the next theory. So the next theory is called multiple intelligences. And this is a theory that I am pretty sure most of you have heard of. It was a real popular theory a while ago by Howard Gardner. It was a theory that started in the 80s. And it's this idea that everybody has different ways of learning. They're like, some people are visual, or verbal, linguistic, bodily, that they learn better by music, or interpersonal. There's all these different ones. Who's heard of this theory? Somebody says, I'm a visual learner. That's what this theory is saying. So this theory, I think, it's an important theory. There's been a lot of debunking of this lately and a lot of disparagement of it. And I think that's unfortunate because I think it's in its base, it's very groundbreaking. Because he was the first to say people learn in different ways. What's been debunked since him, and even he has debunked it himself, Gardner, is that somebody doesn't have the better way of learning. It's that everybody learns in all these different ways. So it's not that you can only learn because you're a visual learner, that visual learning is the only way you can learn, or it's the only best way you can learn. That everybody learns so many different ways. And if you can tap into different ways of learning, every person will have a deeper experience and learn better and learn more and experience it more. So the more ways you can kind of get into that, the better. Somebody talked about smell. This is where it comes in, that smell can really bring it. Or if you play music, or if you have somebody move, that all of that plays into learning what they're trying to learn. So let's go to the next. With this idea, what are some activities or things that you would use that connect to the theory of multiple intelligence if you were showing this photograph? Now, this photograph is a Chinese parade in Utah circa 1880.
That's amazing.
So what are some things you might employ if you were teaching about this photograph? Maybe they could try it out. And so the bodily moving, and then maybe play music. Like you might have a drum, or you play music on your phone or something. I was in in the body of a dragon once doing a dragon dance. I was invited to do that. And so my own experience could come through with that. But if you ever saw a dragon dance, you could talk about your experience too. But I really like the idea of having them move and hearing the music. 1880 is when this photograph was taken, and photographs were rare in 1880. It wasn't like, everybody had one out in the wilderness or out in the community taking photographs. So this was an important time. And that's really a visual, like tapping into the visual, where you say, what do you notice about this photograph? Well, notice the buildings in the background. Well, what does that tell you? So a visual, tapping into your visual learning, you could really study this photograph and get a lot of clues from it. So that maybe they're miners and not railroad workers and things like that. This was a good conversation. So you got multiple intelligences. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so instructional scaffolding, this is a very teachery kind of theory. It really helps in making personal connections. So in the idea of scaffolding is that you want to get some kind of something to help people hang new knowledge on. You want to get a scaffold in their head of something that they can hang knowledge on. So it's this idea that maybe you give them a worksheet, and the worksheet is a form that helps them then put new knowledge in and understand, because they understand a lot of people understand worksheets, and they know then what they need to learn. Another idea is to think about pulling up past memories. And if they have a past memory of something, then they understand that and they can put new knowledge on your past memory. A really good example of that is I worked with a museum. Where was that museum? I think it was in Ephraim. It was a museum that was an old telegraph office. And they had an example of an actual telegraph that kids could use. But what they would always do is they actually had an old cell phone there. And they first talked to kids about texting, like, you know how to text, and what do you do when you text? And you're talking with somebody far away. And they understood texting on a phone, so then they could understand the idea of a telegraph. And it was like texting, but 150 years ago. So they had the knowledge of themselves of texting on a phone, and they understood that. They could the scaffold of that, and then they could put the new knowledge on that to understand the telegraph.
They could learn Morse code, see?
Yeah, and then maybe they could text Morse code. Sometimes it's that comparing two things helps, like you can compare something and that somebody knows, and then they understand something else. So compare, contrast. So it's getting kind of instructional techniques that helps people learn by bringing in either past knowledge or familiar things, worksheets that are familiar so that they can then learn new things. Let's go to the next one. We can look at a photograph. So think of a template or a guide you could use with this artwork with instructional scaffolding. And this is Moroni and Amy Timbimbu from Washakie, Utah in 1939. The Timbimbus are prominent people in our community. Mary Timbimbu was a great artist and has art in natural history and the Folk Art Museum. And some of her descendants are on boards in the community. With this, maybe a template or a guide wouldn't be as good, but you could bring up past memories and past knowledge of what people know about log cabins, what people know about fashion history, and then come up with maybe some theories of why they're standing there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Visual thinking strategies. This is the only theory that I'm showing you today that actually was created and tested and researched in a museum. So this is really based in museum education. And this theory was created just in the 90s, so it's only about a 20-ish or 25-year-old theory. But it's really powerful because what it does is it's this idea, so it's a method that this woman came up with. She's the person who came up with the theory based on her research about people viewing in museums. So when she did research about people in museums, she realized that there are some people who are novice viewers of objects. So they don't have a lot of experience looking at objects and analyzing them and thinking about them and understanding them in a museum. It doesn't matter about your age, it's just your experience going to museums and looking at objects. But then there are intermediate people who have some experience looking at objects, and they behave a different way. And then there's advanced viewers who behave a different way. So she noticed that the novice viewers, really all they cared about, because they were new at it, was what does this have to do with me? What is the connection with me? What is my personal experience with this? They really wanted to know how looking at this object might help or think of them. The intermediate viewers, once they kind of understood looking at objects and how it related to them, an intermediate viewer would say, oh, I know how it relates to me. I want to know what the experts have to say about it. What do historians have to say about it? What do curators? What does the person who took the photograph say about this? Or who made the object, what do they say about this? So it became, the person wants to know, just wants to get all the information they can. And then the advanced viewers are people who really understand, what they know about it, and they understand what other people say about it, and then they start analyzing and putting the two together. And they can come up with their own theories, they can talk about it with some expertise, they can really think about it critically. They are advanced thinking when it comes to looking at objects in museums. So with this kind of construct, she came up with a way to really engage novice viewers, because that's what she wanted to do. She wanted novice viewers of objects to really start thinking about it and understanding it so that they can go to the next level. And so she came up with it became very simple, 3 questions you can ask when you're in a museum to somebody you're with to really get them to start thinking about it critically. So first, what is this object? They have to describe what it is. They have to tell you exactly what they're seeing, and they're looking longer than they would have. Like you said, they won't just flip on by, they have to sit and explain it. Then you say, what do you see that makes you say that? So if they say there's an old wood cabin in the background, what do you see that makes you say that? So then they have to back up their what they say with evidence. It's like the scientific method. They see something, they say it, they have to back it up. So, well, I see wood, and there's something in the middle, which I know is called chinking, and that's a really old way of doing it. And I know it's old because the chinking is falling out. And so they're really starting to look at it. And then you just want to keep them going. What more can we find? So don't just take one look at it. Let's look deeper and deeper and deeper. And so that you start getting to some really deep critical thinking, really deep observations. Really, you're not telling them anything. They're coming up with it themselves. It's all personal. And that's more important than them getting a lecture on exactly what this, the history of this piece is. So novice viewers really need that personal connection where they're coming up with the content. And then once they really get familiar with that and they enjoy it and they think it's great and they love having a conversation because their opinion is important, then sometimes it takes several times, sometimes it can be just one visit. They start to want to know what other people say about it. So this theory is one that we use in our museum quite a bit, because we have a lot of novice viewers that come. We have a lot of school children who aren't very familiar, but even grown-ups that haven't been to a museum before. So we use this quite a bit. And then if they start wanting to know more about a work of art, because our museum is about artwork, then we can start telling them if they ask. And we know they're starting to get into the intermediate. Okay, let's go to the next slide and we can look. Visual thinking strategies in practice. So let's practice VTS. All right. So what do you see in this photograph? Yeah, so you see kind of this juxtaposition of rural and urban. The change of it. Do you think that the farmer is going to be able to harvest their crops before the housing takes it over? We could go on and on with this and see more and more, but I think you got the idea. Like, I didn't even notice the little path along the canal that really does make it a canal. Yeah, it's great. All right, let's go on. I wanted to be done by 2, but we're going to rush through the rest. We've had such good conversations, I didn't want to shut them down. Okay, so now that you know some background and philosophy of how we teach in a museum that can really play into how we give tours as a docent, we are going to talk about some tours, doing some touring techniques for when you actually are giving a tour and how those philosophies can play into it. So first of all, we already talked about what a docent is. Somebody jumped the gun, thank goodness. We already talked about it. And the role of a docent in a museum. We've talked about this a little bit, but does somebody want to summarize what we've talked about? What does a docent do in a museum?
Facilitator, not a lecturer.
I give you the answer, yeah.
He's got lectures.
What does that mean? Facilitator, not a lecturer. Teacher. Yeah, it's this idea that you facilitate learning. It's not that you're lecturing. It's not like you're just pouring knowledge into somebody. You want to facilitate learning. If that means that that you're going to do a VTS kind of tour, the visual thinking strategies, where you're just going to ask them to give them your opinion because they're just new at looking at something, you do that. Or maybe you facilitate by telling a story. If you have a great story because you experienced something and you can compel them into getting empathy and understanding something. Or
It's gotta be true though, right?
yeah, it can't be a made up story. Let's go to the next slide. It actually tells some things that you can do. You could do some questioning strategies to help you facilitate. So, asking questions, just like, what do you see here? Or why do you think? Or, the whole, how do you know that? I mean, why, what comes to Geneva Steel and how does it get there? Is it trucks? Is it railroad? Leading questions and help them think it through. You can also do discussion, where you actually have a discussion with somebody. Somebody you're giving a tour to might know a lot more than you, which is great, because then you can learn from them. And they can tell a story about something that you have no experience with. And then you can, the whole group, as well as you, can learn from that person. Another way of thinking of discussion, and I tell this to a lot of people, when I give tours to high school students, I don't just discuss with them. I love to argue with high school students. If you can argue with a high school student, you have reached nirvana in teaching. Because if a high school student argues with you, first they have to come up with an opinion, which is amazing in itself for a teenager. I know I have 2 teenagers, boys right now. And then they have to voice their opinion, which, oh my gosh, then we're really doing well. And they have to kind of argue with you and with a person of authority and say something that is different than them. And that's wonderful to be able to then have this great debate because they have an opinion, they're expressing their opinion, you're expressing your opinion. They understand that other people have different ideas than you and you can have a civil conversation, even if, you don't want to shout in a museum, but having a debate about something really can solidify learning, especially with certain types of people. And so having a very civil debate, I like to do, especially with teenagers. A conversation is another way to really facilitate in a museum, where you talk with people as if like it's your family you're taking through a museum. And you ask them questions, you are casual. It's not this formal education where you're lecturing somebody, but it's a conversation. And we've already talked about learning from participants. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, with all of this idea of, informal learning and thinking about constructivism and doing and making sure that you have conversations and you're facilitating a tour and it's not a lecture, you still want to have some kind of structure. Everybody loves a little bit of structure that then you can all be messy in. But the structure helps with people in their learning. And the structure on a tour is something that can just frame whatever you do. It's like an essay. Who remembers writing an essay? Oh, a few people. What is the form of an essay? What do you do at the beginning? The introductory paragraph. And what's in the introductory paragraph?
Your purpose.
your theme, your purpose, your point. You tell them what you're going to tell them, right? And that's exactly what you do on a tour. The beginning of a tour, it's the introductory. First you introduce yourself, you introduce the museum, and then you say, today we are going to look at rural America. Or you can say, we are going to look at specifically farming in rural America, and you go to the places that talk about farming. Or we're going to talk about industry, and then you go to the places. If you want to get smaller and more specific, you can. You can be broad and just say rural America. But just it lets them know what the theme is that you're going to give the tour. And make sure it's a simple theme. You don't want to say, we're going to look at industry in Alabama in 1930, because there's probably one picture of industry in Alabama in 1930. So you want to be able to have it be a simple theme that can be an overarching theme. Okay, so after the beginning, let's go to the next slide. That's the middle, right? So in your essay, you have the introduction, and then you have your essay. And this is the meat of your tour. And this is the things that you want to talk about within the theme. And make sure that it's things that you like to talk about or you're interested in talking about, that you want to explore in a facilitated conversation. Make sure that it always goes back to your theme, though. It needs to go back to your theme. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, then in an essay, what do you do in the last paragraph? The conclusion, you tell them what you just told them, right. In the end, you go over your tour and what you did. And this, as I mentioned here, is so important in capping the learning, because what it does is it makes people, when you end, you're like, okay, we're done. Thanks for coming. We just learned all about farming in rural America and how it's changing. What was your favorite thing that we talked about today? Or what was one thing you learned today? Or what will you show somebody if you come back? What's the first thing you'll show them? Then they have to think back through the tour, what they saw, what they liked, what they didn't like, what really impressed on them. And doing that really solidifies the learning, and it makes it so they remember the tour, and they remember some things that they learned. It's that kind of constructivist doing that brings it so that they remember. And so if you're running out of time, it's better to just not show them the last panel or the last photograph or whatever you're going to show them, and just do the end, because it is so important. Let's go to the next slide. And always remember that you want to do some transitions. When you're giving a tour, that helps with the structure. This is the total structure where you are giving a tour. You don't want to just stop talking and move to something else, because then everybody stands there and is like, ooh, are we supposed to follow her? What are we doing? The structure helps when you can say, let's go talk about a different piece. Or, as I have some examples, the patterning in this Navajo rug is similar in style, but not color to the next one we are going to look at. You can make it a complex transition, or it can just say, let's go look at another photograph, and that's fine. But it helps people in this structure of knowing where to go and what to do with you. Okay, any questions about touring?
How many do you take through the tour at a time?
That depends on the museum and what they think. At my museum, we try to do 10 or less, but sometimes we do 20. This is a tight setup. I don't know if any more than 10 would be good. What do you think?
Less than 10 here.
Yeah, less than 10, because it's so small. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, one thing to remember when you're giving tours, and I'm almost done, and then we're going to take a tour. And I know we scheduled till 3, but I'll probably be done early, so which everybody's happy about, Hands-on components. When I give tours, I have things people can touch. Just like we were talking about, the coal and the steel would enhance a tour and learning about how steel is made. That having something people can touch really does play into that multiple intelligences. That you can learn about something so many different ways. And it really does help to have something that, that is tactile. So you really get into these different learning styles that'll help. And so I really encourage you, if you can, have something somebody can touch. It might be I don't know what it could be, but you'll see an example of what I do that is touch-worthy. But it can be your imagination, and that's how you structure your tour, is thinking about it. What will enhance somebody's learning if I bring something? Sometimes the thing you could bring it should always support what's on exhibit, but sometimes it can be like if there's a hole in the exhibit that doesn't quite show something, you can bring something that can fill in that hole. So maybe there's a section here that talks about farming, but it doesn't talk specifically about farming here in this community. So you could bring maybe, some material that people use, that they create in this community, and show them, well, I don't even know where some of these are. I haven't memorized the thing. But some of these, like farming communities produce, wheat or rye. But here, wheat and rye might not grow, but something else might grow. And you can say, well, here, this grows. And then you could show them. So those kinds of things where you fill in holes might work. Like I said, show what cannot be on exhibit. So hands-on things in a museum, on a tour, really enhance a tour. And you'll see an example of that when we go around. All right, let's go to the next. I'm trying to hurry up here. Okay, we're almost done, I promise. There are some great docent hints, and I'm not going to go through these because they're all in this docent handbook that everybody can have, that is created by the Smithsonian for this exhibition. It's really a great brochure, and it gives a lot of great hints for how to talk about this exhibit. So when you leave, we can get you one of those. So definitely take one of these. It'll help you. It'll help you with the themes, because I didn't go through the themes. I'm just teaching you how to be a docent in general. This will help you with what the themes are and what to talk about. So I'm not giving you that. I mean, the tour I give you will help a little bit, but it's not thorough. This is thorough. This is something you should read. So what I've given you is how to be a docent generally, and you could do that anywhere for anything. You could go to the museum next door and be a great docent there. This will show you how to talk about this, how to facilitate a tour in this exhibition. Okay, so this is great. So these slides are just adapted from this, so I'm not going to go through them right now. So let's go to the next one. And then the next one. And then the next one. We're running out of time. And the next one. Okay. There's other resources that this exhibit has that you can use for your tour. One of them is the activity guide. And I have one here. Where is it? Here it is. The activity guide. This activity guide is for all ages, and we're going to hand these out in a minute because I'm going to use this on my tour. This is meant to be a self-guided tour. People can pick them up and do it themselves, and you give them a pencil and they can do it. But I'm going to show you how, as a docent, you could use this on your tour and have people go through it with you. So that it's not only a self-guide, it can be a help with a docent guide as well, and it can be enhanced by a person going through it with them. This is something that I wrote for Utah Humanities, and it really has all the interactive ideas that and facilitating conversation ideas that I've just talked about today. So it does that in a guide, in a self-guide, meant for a group of people to take together, or a single person to take through the exhibit as well.
So they could do their own self-guide if they want, or we ask them if they'd like us to guide.
Yeah. And then if you guide them, you can do your own tour, or you can use this as a helpful guide in going around too. I'm going to show you how this can be used as a helpful guide, but you don't have to use this on a tour. You can do a tour that's all on your own once you study what's in the exhibit. Like, oh, I'd really like to talk about this instead. You can do that too. Okay, in addition, so this is the activity guide. Let's go to the next slide. We also created a teacher guide. My colleague, Annie Burbage-Ream, who couldn't make it today, created a teacher guide that's for teachers. And this museum has that. And ideally, they can give it to teachers then to create lessons in their classes and then bring the kids here, hopefully. So the reason I'm telling you all is that if you're giving a tour and someone says, oh, I'm a local teacher, say, wait a minute, do you have the activity guide? Because you can bring your students and really teach them about this exhibit. So this is available too, and the museum should have it somewhere. By the weekend, they'll have it. And so the activity guide is great. And it all relates to the Utah core. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is just, we don't have to do this. This is for museums. We tell museums that we can support them, and we do these things, but that's what I'm here doing, supporting the museum. So let's go to the next slide. And that's it. Before we do our tour, our interactive tour. So if you have any questions, or if you don't understand anything I've talked about today, you are really more than welcome to email me as well. I'm going to give this PowerPoint to Bobby, and she will have it available if anybody needs it, I'm assuming, because she asked for a copy of it. But my email address, vcatherall@umfa, stands for Utah Museum of Fine Arts, .utah.edu. Utah stands for University of Utah.
What, has anybody timed this to where, how long should we take a group through?
That's a really good question. I would recommend that you find out from the group how long they have. And then I usually plan for a half an hour tour. Sometimes people want an hour tour, and you could do an hour tour. It seems a little long, but I usually plan for half an hour, and then they can look on their own after that. But you can ask them. They're like, oh, we're here for an hour. It's like, oh, would you like a half an hour tour? Or would 20 minutes be okay? And then you can be on your own. Or they might say, we only have 10 minutes. Oh, if you only have 10 minutes, let me just show you this one thing. And then you can be on your own, you know, that kind of thing. Or they might say, I just want to be on my own. I don't want anybody to tell me. And then you're just like, go ahead.
You give every visitor a self-guided thing and the pamphlet?
No, the pamphlet is just for you.
Oh, okay.
These are just for you. These are docent guides that help you teach in this museum, in this exhibit. This, if they want to do a self-guide, you can give it to them. Some people don't like these. Some people don't, I mean, like I said, everybody has different ways they like to learn and different things they like to do. Some people love these. Some people, they don't want them. Yeah. So if you can say there is a self-guide if you'd like to go through, and here's a pencil, and then give it to them. Or, you know, or they might say, nope, I'm not interested. The terminology is, if somebody pays to get into Silver Reef, they can come over here.
If they just want to come here?
If they just want to come here, they have to go and pay.